chords for music producers. We are going to be in the key of C minor. In the key of C minor, you have a lot of dissonance. And that dissonance helps us to create some very beautiful chords. It's a little different from the major scale. For example, in C major, very lush, very beautiful chords in C major. But in C minor, things get a little more dark, a little more moody. And when you are in the minor, that is exactly what you're going to experience. Much moodier chords. Let's explore some of the best chords that you can play for music production. You of course have the very standard chord, which is the triad. This would be the C minor triad. This would be a B flat triad. But C minor is a minor chord and B flat is a major chord. As you play the triad, you have very strong voicings. Once you add in the next chord, which would be a seventh chord, you kind of can hear right away how things begin to change, how we have a lot more dissonance, especially in that B flat. This would not be a good chord. This would not be a good chord for music producers. This chord has a lot of dissonance and it doesn't really sound that great. You probably won't hear this chord in very many modern productions. You might, however, hear this chord. It's a lot stronger, more fuller sounding chord because it does not contain that dissonance that we had earlier. As far as B flat is concerned, you might hear this chord, or maybe even this chord, which is just an extended with the B flat on the top. It's just a B flat, but it's a little fuller. You might also hear this chord, and it has a very sad feeling to it. It almost sounds as though we're about to break up with our significant other. So you might hear that chord, but of course that chord introduces an A. And A is not in the scale of C minor. So we might not actually play that chord if we're trying to stay within the scale that we have introduced, which is C minor. But using seventh chords can be great chords for your music production. It's a very easy way for you to find the seventh chord. What you do is you take your triad and you're going to look for the next note. So we can simply add a fourth note, and then we can add another one, and we can add another one, and now we are at our seventh. This is a C minor seventh. To make this chord sound fuller, we can just add a bass note. To make it add even more fuller, we can add an extended bass note. And to make it even further fuller, we can add a fifth, which is the G, and really make it sound very full. We're back into dissonance land. We don't want to go to this seventh. We want to go to this seventh. But you might be able to hear how this might sound like a chord that you could use in some of your production. So we have our triad, and if we want to make it a seventh, we simply need to add the note from our root note, the one right next to it, on the top. In the case of C7, we need to go down another note, because this would be the seventh from that C, but we need to go down one more. In other cases of other chords, you will hear how just by finding that top note and going down one, adding that to your triad will produce the seventh chord. Too many seventh chords or too many of the same chord, it's going to sound boring and dull. So you don't want to just add a bunch of seventh chords into your music, though you can. It would be great to mix in your seventh chords with your triads, and that will produce a more even or more varied sound and give you some variety in your music. So we can have seventh chords mixed in with triads. 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 And as you can see, if a seventh chord gives you some extension in your chord and kind of adds a little more color, then the triad brings you back to the scale, brings you back into what we would call home, or to a bass sound. Remember, triads are very fundamental in creating chords. Sometimes you don't even need triads to create chords. In a lot of music production, you might only use two chords. So this would be a chord where we are dropping the third of the chord. Here is our triad. And here is our triad without that third. What would be the benefit of using a chord that's missing a note? Well, It opens up and it allows you to have a more open chord voicing. That way you can play other notes with your chords. See how as soon as I introduced that third into this pattern, it muddied up the sound very much. But if we drop that third, then we open up our chord voicing and we basically have a very bass dominant sound. So we have introduced so far 3 different chords that you can use in your music production. The triad, the 7th, and of course, dropping out that third. 2-note chords definitely give you an availability to open up your music production and have a more lighter sound. Now, going from the opposite of a lighter sound to a much heavier sound, to a much more fuller sound, would be the introduction of adding more notes into your chords, including 9th and 11th chords. An 11th chord is an extended chord. It features many chords, many notes. For example, this is F minor 11. And it's very cool to see that we have Reason demonstrating what our chord is here using Chord Sequencer. We can see the F minor 11. So an 11th chord has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes. 11th chords have so many notes that there's so many different ways that you can play those chords. You can play them open, how I am playing it, or you could also play it closed. In this closed chord voicing, we have a lot of chords, we have a lot of notes in one area, taking up this middle portion of the keyboard. In the open chord voicing, our notes are stretched out and spread apart, which gives us a more open feel. It's stretching across the bass side of the keyboard and extending into the upper range as well. And the higher you go, the more you can begin to hear those very beautiful top notes. An 11th chord is probably going to be one of those chords that you feature in a lot of gospel or R&B. It's not really going to be something you would hear in trap or even pop. You're probably going to hear mostly 7th, 9th, and triads. An easy way for you to find an 11th chord is to combine 2 triads together. For example, we can combine the C minor triad with the B flat triad and get C minor 11. Notice that it sounds different if we begin to separate them. Chord voicing is very important. This is the same C minor chord, but we just changed the voicing of it. And just by changing the voicing, we can make our chord sound lighter and higher in the scale. But even if we stay with this hand playing the C minor, even if we stay with this hand playing this C minor, and we change the top triad, we're still playing a C minor 11. This instrument that we are using to create the piano sound is from Native Instruments' Alicia Keys. The instrument that is displaying our chords is Chord Sequencer. If you want to see a full version of what Chord Sequencer looks like, here it is. Currently, we are using it in the Edit Chord, Learn Chord state. And in this state, every time we play a chord, it will learn that chord in Chord Sequencer. And we can learn the chords that we have been playing, and we can also learn some new chords, like this one. Or even this one. Here's a new favorite that I'm liking very much. E flat 11. I like it because it leads into this chord. And it all has a very beautiful sound. Great to get that E flat in there. G minor, and let's finish it off with this chord. And of course, Chord Sequencer is a great player inside of Reason, which will allow you to learn some chords as well as learn which chords go with other chords. It will allow you to sequence out those chords and create your own chord progressions. And it also has a bunch of different chord sets that you can use. If you're not savvy to create your own chord progressions, they have many different chords that you can use already set up to play these different kinds of chord sets. Now let's return to our original view. It will probably be in your best interest to learn triads first before beginning to add other chords or chord voicings to the mix. We last ended off on C11, which is this chord. And if we want to create a ninth chord after creating our 11th chord, we only simply need to do is drop off that top note. And again, for a 7th, we can take off a note. So this is how we can create a C minor 11 by playing a C minor triad and then adding a B flat triad, C9 by removing that top note, C7 by removing the next note, So a 7th chord, a 9th chord, and an 11th chord. Unless you plan on creating the next top jazz record, I don't think we need to go any further than an 11th chord in your music production. But the next chord up would be a 13th chord. And well, if a 11th chord has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes, then a 13th chord has 7 notes. And immediately you can hear even more dissonance with that 13th chord. A 13th chord would be like playing a triad and a 7th chord together. Remember earlier we looked at this as well. We looked at this chord earlier and we said it has a lot of dissonance. Well, when you combine dissonance with some consonants or with some good sounding notes, then you get a lot of color. So we have our triad holding down the voicing, and then we add in that dissonance, and now we have a B flat 13. So in order to create a 13th, we're going to play a triad, and then we're going to play a 7th chord. Let's try with the B flat triad. 7th chord. Oh, that candle is really hot. So this is how we can create, wow, it kind of burned some of my hair. But I love it for our beautiful scene that we have created here with our piano. So this, I could smell my hair that burned. This is how you can create 13th chords by using a triad, like a B flat, and then playing the corresponding 7th chord in your right hand. It's not that it's a complex chord, more so that it does take a lot for you to build this chord, seeing as how we are using 7 notes in order to build this chord. This might be something that would sound even better with a pad or a synth or a polysynth rather than a piano. But I digress. Now we have learned many chords that you can use in your music production. We've learned a triad. We've learned a 7th. We've also learned a 9th and an 11th and also a 13th. We also learned that we can drop that middle note or the 3rd, and we can just play 2 notes together. And if we do that, we open up the possibilities for it to add more voicings with our right hand. Many people will probably want to know, hey, what are some certain kinds of chords? For example, I often would hear people say, how do you play gospel chords? And really the understanding that you have to have about gospel chords is more about where your chords are going and not necessarily what your chords are. But I'll give you one, for example. Sustained chords are chords that are often used in gospel music. And they're very similar to that 2 chord that I told you about earlier. They're triads that have moved that 3rd note to somewhere else. So for example, a sus2 would be if you move your 3rd down. So here is a C minor, which has C, E flat, G, and here is C sus, which has C, D, G. And right away, it doesn't necessarily sound all that gospel-y. It could even be classical or pop. Let's hear the difference between the C minor and the C sus. There is a difference there. It does kind of put you in a mood. There are many different kinds of sus. You also can do a sus4. Excuse me. One more time. There we are. There's our sus4. And so you will see that it has 2 notes that are often together. And whenever you have notes that are very closely together like that, it's going to produce that kind of dissonance we were talking about. Not like when you have a chord, say for example, like this one, which has a half note. But still, when you have those 2 notes together, it creates a brighter dissonance than this. So that is how you can create that chord. Watch as I create it. Watch as we make it sound more gospel-y. 1 chord. Now, on their own, they aren't necessarily gospel-y either. It's more about how the chords move from place to place that makes it have a gospel-y sound. Let's switch over to F major. In my ear, it has a gospel-y sound. What's actually happening is we're using tritone substitution and we're using passing chords to get to the next note. So for example, we started on F sus2 and then we go down to the E, but we're playing this E7 alt chord. And this alt chord is kind of like a diminished chord. It has a little bit of flair, a little jazz to it. When we play with this E, it has a nice little sound to it. So we have our F, and then we play that E. And what that E does is it leads us to this A. And the reason why it leads us to this A is because it's 5 notes away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you know anything about the circle of fifths, then you would understand why each note leads to another note. I'll give you an example. The C leads you to the F, and the F leads you to the B flat, and B flat leads you to E flat, and E flat should lead you to G sharp or A flat. The circle of fifths, when you're using these passing chords, really sound very, very beautiful. As you're using the passing tones going through the circle of fifths, when you finally land on that home chord, it's just so awesome. This is also known as like a 2-5-1 chord progression. If we look at F major, for example, and we say we wanted to do a 2-5-1, we're using the 5 to lead to the 1 or F. So we would start here, and then we would move to here and into the 1. So our circle of fifths is leading us from C to F to B flat. Or it can go from F to B flat to E flat. And you can just keep going around and around and around in the circle of fifths, going from each of the different keys, finding how they lead from one place to the other. Tritone substitution that I was talking about earlier is when we substituted this E for the B flat, and by substituting that, it still fits and leads to the A. Why does that work? Well, because it's 6 semitones away from E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So anytime you have one of these chords, an alt chord, anything that has this alt feel to it, this diminished chord, anytime you have that, you can substitute that bass note with the 6th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you'll get that kind of gospel-y sound when you're moving in your music like that. See, right there in that song, which is Never Would Have Made It, the original chords but we can add a tritone substitution and add in a whole nother chord by using that tritone substitution that I talked about. Starting with our C and moving down, going to the E, then adding in this B flat. It's just a whole nother chord that we don't even necessarily need for this environment. But it does give us a flair that we can use. Why does this sound good? Well, it's because of the notes that are next to each other. C is right next to B, so it kind of leads into each other because they're so close. So going from C to this B just kind of naturally goes down. And then B to E is because, well, circle of fifths. B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. E is a fifth of B. And so we can play that coming off of the B. We can go back to B flat to substitute it and then finish off our chord. This is called a walk-up, and walk-ups help us sound gospel-y as well. Anytime that we are creating chords or using chord progression or playing piano, we want to be thinking about the different chords, their names, where they fall in the scale. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 octave. The 1 in correlation to the 2, the 1 in correlation to the 3, the 1 in correlation to the 4, the 1 in correlation to the 5. They all have their purposes. Hello? Yes. They left when I got back. Yeah. So, as I was saying, the 1, the 5, in many chord progressions, we're always trying to get back to the 1. No matter where you start, we're really trying to get back to 1. 1 is home. 1 feels safe. 1 feels natural. The 2 is not safe. The 2 is not natural. The 2 is not home. The 1 feels like this candle. It's warm and inviting. Definitely not inviting. This is leading me somewhere. I'm still going somewhere. Now I'm going home. So the relation of the notes and where they fall, the degrees of the scale from 1 to 7 and even the octave, they all play a role in how we want to make our music sound. If we want to sound like we're still going somewhere, rising even, we want to use things like the 4 or even the 6. If we want to feel like we're heading back home, we want to use the 5 and the 1. Because the relation, of course, fifths always lead us to the 1. So we always want to be thinking about how our music in the piano, how it moves us from one place to the next. Not all musical genres use this return to the home kind of feel or strategy. Not all music genres do. But in popular music, you will often hear this return to home. In whatever scale and whatever key that we are in, we always want to get back to the one. In most popular music or pop music, we want to get back to the one. But not all music is like that. In this chord progression, though this is not the one, this is not the one of F major. Because we have set it up as the one, the first chord, it feels like home. It doesn't actually resolve that chord progression, which would be Music Soul Child's So Beautiful. It doesn't really resolve. You can actually hear it feeling and wanting to resolve. Instead, it just repeats. Because naturally it should resolve on F. But the way that the chord is set up, it doesn't really resolve that way. So what we actually might be dealing with in this case is scale of G, but with a bunch of accidentals. If we wanted to resolve it, we would need to add in a fifth to lead us back to that F. And if you're listening to a live version of that song, that might be one way that they end that song, by adding in this C to end on the F, because C is a fifth away from F. And let's see. Oh, we could go. So always be thinking about the degrees of where you are in your scale.